Hi Year 9, welcome to today's lesson. It's going to be our last one in our character development project, and we're going to finish it off by looking at sequential movement. Our entire project, focusing on character development, has been about bringing objects to life. And a great way to bring objects to life is by showing movement. I know we've touched upon this slightly in a previous lesson, but we'll be focusing solely on it in today's lesson. So let's have a look at our lesson objectives. We will explore how to document movement in two-dimensional form by exploring the works of Edward Muybridge. And we'll be learning how to draw sequenced movements by using grids to structure a succession of drawings showing one object moving. Before we get started on today's lesson, I just want to recap what we've covered already in our character development lessons. We started off by bringing inanimate objects to life, and we've done this by drawing a simplified version of an object of your choosing, focusing on lined drawings, and then we added features to bring them to life. Then we moved on to look at emotions, and we've done this by looking at Hattie Stewart and practicing the way she draws features and doodles to help us depict emotions. Then we moved on to look at narrative, and then we made storyboards as well to help build the backstory of our characters. And we're going to move that on today by looking at movement. I just wanted to highlight some of my favourite work that you guys have handed in. I've been really impressed by the level of your drawing and just how much you've thrown yourself into the project. I've loved seeing you develop all your characters and what you come on. So I'll look forward to seeing how you create movement in the characters next. So as we are going to be trying to capture movement in two-dimensional form, we need to consider what movement looks like when it's frozen in time. So I'm going to introduce to you now a photographer called Edward Muybridge. Let's have a look. Edward Muybridge was the pioneering 19th century photographer, best known for his stop-motion images proving that horses could fly, if only for a fraction of a second. So we'll talk more about, you watch a video about that on the next slide. I just want to talk to you a bit about his work first. So he was an Englishman, he moved to America, and he started off his career as a landscape photographer. And he went on to use his experimental photography skills to study movement in humans and animals. And his photographs were actually extremely important as they changed people's understanding of movement. So Muybridge introduced new ideas and techniques and new ways of looking and considering movement, and this went on to influence artists, scientists. It was even arguably the beginning of cinema as we know it today. Muybridge's work continues to be just as important now as it was all those years ago when he was actually taking the photos. He's a really famous photographer and a great person for us to be looking at for our studies into movement. I found this video as an introduction to an exhibition which is happening a few years ago now. So I'd like you to watch the video all the way through and answer the questions on the screen now. This is just going to help us build our knowledge and also understand just why his work is important and how influential he is.
Edward Muybridge was one of the great photographic thinkers and technical pioneers of all time, whose mind reached beyond still photography and anticipated the rise of cinema. Muybridge emigrated to the United States as a young man. He began his photographic career as a landscape photographer, producing dramatic views of both Yosemite and San Francisco. Then, in 1872, Racehorse owner and former governor of California, Leland Stanford, hired Muybridge to photograph his horse galloping in order to discover whether all 4 of the animal's hooves were lifted off the ground at the same time. In order to photograph the horse at speed, Muybridge engineered a system of multiple cameras with tripwire shutter releases to capture each stage of the movement. The project took him 5 years. In the June of 1878, his photographs proved conclusively, for the very first time, that a galloping horse lifts all 4 hooves off the ground. The effects of Muybridge's discovery were seismic. Artists, including Edward Degas and Thomas Eakins, began to reference the photographs in order to make their paintings closer to life. Muybridge toured Europe with his pictures, where he astonished audiences that included William Gladstone, Alfred Lord Tennyson, and the Prince of Wales. However, when Leland published The Horse in Motion, Muybridge's role in the project was barely mentioned, and the relationship between the 2 of them immediately disintegrated. He then went on to work on his seminal project entitled Animal Locomotion from 1884 to 1887 at the University of Pennsylvania. Animal Locomotion was Edward Muybridge's most influential and enduring body of work. Funded by the University of Pennsylvania, the project became a wide-ranging, systematic study of movement, and it broke new ground in terms of both science and the emerging art form of photography. Each plate in the series shows the same subject in sequential phases of one movement. Muybridge recorded varied forms of movement in a wide range of animals, mostly taken at Philadelphia Zoo, from pigeons in flight to the subtleties of gait found in sloths, kangaroos and capybaras. Muybridge also documented human subjects engaged in walking, running, descending staircases, boxing, fencing, weightlifting, and wrestling. During his time at Pennsylvania, Muybridge greatly improved on the previous technical capabilities of his equipment, developing a clockwork motor to fire the camera shutters in sequence. This meant he could document rapid or subtle motion without having to depend on the subject's movements to trigger a shutter. Muybridge extended his original set of cameras from 12 to 24 and set up an extra 2 separate batteries of cameras to capture rear and angled views as well. Muybridge took over 20,000 photographs in the 3 years that he spent working on the project, finally ruthlessly editing down the selection to 781 separate plates. The photographs fundamentally changed understandings of movement. The imagery of animal locomotion also had a profound impact on a huge range of subsequent artists, including Marcel Duchamp and Francis Bacon. Our exhibition will be the first exhibition of Muybridge's work in the UK since the Tate's major retrospective in 2010, and I very much look forward to welcoming you to the gallery.
There was lots of terminology in that video that you might not have understood. Don't worry, don't be too scared by it. We're not looking at photography today, so you don't need to know everything. What I do want you to pull from that video though is how this photographer influenced so many other movements. So you've got scientists who are commissioning this photographer to prove movement and how people and animals move. And that's really interesting. I've included some artists here who are also influenced by movement and the theme of pausing movement and freezing movement. So all these photographers are influenced in the same way as Muybridge. You can see Marcel Duchamp has included lots of figures going down the stairs, but shown them in one frame. Now this does highlight the movement. And then you got Edward Degas, who until then didn't quite understand how the form of a horse is when they are frozen in movement. But by Muybridge's photographs, he was then able to create more realistic paintings which does freeze movement. And then way later on, you've got photographers like David Hockney, who are also still influenced by this idea of capturing movement from different perspectives, angles, and showing them in one frame to highlight the movement. So we're going to be looking at this freezing movement in a two-dimensional form in today's lesson. I've included a little clip on this slide, and if you're a Pixar fan like I am, then you've probably already seen it. I don't want you to take any notes for this one, but I do want you to have a think while you're watching the little animation and consider the movements which are included by the objects involved. There's actually loads happening in that clip. I know it's only a short clip, but there's so much movement involved. It would have involved a whole team of artists to create that short clip. So I want to just focus on a small movement of the lamp. So I've included a GIF on the page now, just to highlight a small movement, and we're going to break that down. So this little sketch includes 87 sketches, so there is a lot of work that goes behind making an animation. I've highlighted just 6 of these sketches to show you how when these are put in a sequence and then they are all put together to create that movement. So you can see the first frame starts off the movement, and then the second image then involves just a small little movement, and then the third another little movement, and so on. But these little movements all put together to create the fluid movement, and it's this sequencing effect that we are going to be looking at and focusing on during our drawing task today. Like we've just seen on the previous slide, I want us to create a movement within our drawing task today, and we're going to do this by creating a grid and a sequence of drawings that vary from one another to create this movement, so exactly as we saw on the page before. But let's break this drawing task down a little bit. I want you to remember everything we've already covered in our character development. It's up to you whether you want to make the object a character during this task. I'll leave that up to you. Our first step, we go in to pick an object and include a movement. So I've included a few ideas on the screen to get your ideas flowing. You can have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee being poured, the movement in the coffee drops, or a pencil drawing a line. That'd be quite a good one, I think. I'll leave that up to you. It's completely your choice. Then the second part, we are going to show movement through a sequenced set of drawings. Now for this, we're going to need the same grid we used for the storyboard. So if you need to refresh your memory, pop back on the other video and draw a grid. Use the same measurements because each of these boxes need to be even. So I think it was 8 centimeters by 6 centimeters. That should help you out in this drawing task. And then finally, we go in to do each drawing will include a slight difference from the previous drawing to show those different stages of movement. So we go into freeze the movement and then do the next little bit of movement, frozen, showing the difference through the sequence of drawings. This should make a bit more sense in my demo video on the next slide. Before I show you the demonstration video, I just wanted to include these images to help explain my thought process behind my drawing. So I chose an object, which was a candle, and I chose my movement, which was going to be a mixture of the melting wax and the flickering flame. So with this idea in mind, I then went on to Google for a quick image search to find references for my drawing task. So I've included those references on the screen here. And I just wanted to also highlight how those images progress throughout the sequence of drawings. So obviously we've got 6 final images, and I knew I wanted to start out with a full candle with a steady flame, and I wanted to end the sequence with a burnt out candle and a flickering flame. So to get from my first spot to my final spot, my middle images needed to show the movement happening slowly throughout these drawings. So I used these images as references and slightly altered my next drawing from the previous one. And you'll see this in motion in the next slide throughout my demonstration video. So as I highlighted on the previous slide, there are a few steps you need to cover before you go ahead and complete your drawing task. First, you need to pick your item. I recommend you pick something which isn't too complicated to draw, because you are required to repeat the process 6 times. So keep it easy for yourself. You're going to just want to show a slight difference, but you are going to want the main part of the object to be quite identical to the last part. So for example, I chose something simple like a candle to help with this process. So have a think about that. And then I need you to think before you get started what movement you're going to include in this sequence of drawings. So with mine, it was the melted wax and the flickering candle light. Then, for the first part you draw in, I need you to draw out a grid like we did for the storyboard lesson. So if you need to go back and check the dimensions, because that's really going to help. Like I said, we need these drawings to be quite precise in order for this movement to work. So draw your grid out, and then I'm going to break down this demonstration video and show you the process I've included throughout. So I've already drawn my grid. Again, make sure you've got them neat and tidy. So my first step is then to mark the middle part of each panel. Now this is going to help me get all the images to a very similar standard. Like I said, I want to get them quite identical as much as I can, apart from a slight movement. I've measured out my candle width is 3 centimeters. So I know to always put the candle 3 centimeters directly in the middle frame. Then I've drawn my first one, which is a full candle. The second drawing is just melted slightly. We don't want a lot of difference, and we don't want them too similar either. So you need to get the balance right on what you want to include. And I've repeated this process along the grid, making sure that my candle is slowly melting and the flames differ every time. Now I have added colour to help with the final outcome, but you don't need colour for this task. I just added colour because I needed a bit of colour. Please use the success criteria as a sort of checklist to help you make sure you've got everything you need for today's lesson. First off, I'm looking for those written answers from the Muybridge video. Then I want your drawing task, which should include a neat, even grid, including 6 drawings that show an object at different stages of movement. And lastly, I am looking for some reflective writing. So you can use the questions on the next slide to help guide that process, and also include any extra thoughts you've got on your drawing task. You can use the questions on the screen now to help guide your reflection on today's lesson. I'd love to hear your thoughts. There is also an extension task if you'd like to go and try that out. I've included mine on the screen. These sequence drawings can be all included in one image to show the movement. So there's more about that on an additional video, which you can find on Teams. And I just want to also include a big thank you. We're at the end of our character development project now, and I've really enjoyed seeing all your drawings and the progress you've made throughout the project. So well done. I know we're all working under really hard conditions right now, and you've just been amazing. So well done on all your hard work, and thank you. And I look forward to working on our next project in the next few weeks.